I need you to understand something before I start. I've gone back and forth about whether to post this at all. Part of me still isn't sure what actually happened. Part of me isn't sure I can trust my own memory of it. But I've been sitting with this for 8 months now, and I think I need to say it out loud or type it out loud. I guess because keeping it inside is doing something to me that I do and have a name for yet. It started with a room, not a metaphor. A literal room. A rental room in a shared house in a mid-sized city where I didn't know anyone and had no reason to be suspicious of anything. I was 26. I had just taken a remote content job, video research, and scripting for a mid-tier YouTube channel. And I needed somewhere cheap, quiet, and with decent internet. The listing said all three. The photos looked fine. Neutral walls, one window, a wooden desk built into the corner like whoever lived there before me cared about productivity. I moved in on a Tuesday in early October. Gray sky, cold that felt like it had opinions. I had 2 suitcases, a backpack, and a laptop bag. That was the whole of me at that point. The landlord wasn't there when I arrived. He'd left a key in a lockbox and sent me a long, friendly text about trash days and the thermostat and how the hot water takes about 40 seconds to warm up in the morning. His name was Marcus. He was around 35 maybe. I'd only seen one photo of him. A profile picture on the rental platform, slightly overexposed. Him standing somewhere outdoors, wearing a gray fleece, brown skin, close-cut hair, easy smile. He looked like a guy who coached youth soccer on weekends and remembered everyone's coffee orders. Normal. That's the word. Everything about the setup was so aggressively normal that it didn't occur to me to look closer. I unpacked in about 40 minutes. Set up my laptop, connected to the Wi-Fi, ordered a sandwich from a place 2 blocks away, and ate it at the desk while watching the gray sky do nothing. That first night, I slept fine. Really fine. Better than I had in weeks. That should have been my first clue, looking back. When everything feels too settled, too quickly, in a place you've never been, that's not comfort, that's something else. Wearing comfort's face. I just didn't know it yet. I just moved into this new house with a few roommates. There was Dana, who worked at a hospital, and Theo, a grad student. They were nice, normal. We'd have those polite kitchen chats about groceries and weather. Nothing too deep. The landlord, Marcus, was exactly like his profile picture. Friendly and easygoing. He stopped by a couple of times to fix things and asked about my job. I told him I'm a content researcher for video scripts. He joked, "So you basically write the internet." I laughed. It was a good line. My job is pretty intense, though. I write about true crime unsolved cases, disappearances, that kind of stuff. I'm good at finding that one detail that makes a story feel real. The part you can't forget. I listen to police interviews and 911 calls all day. I'm really good at recognizing when something's off in a story. I just wasn't good at recognizing it in my own. The first thing I noticed was the chair. I know how that sounds, but let me explain. Primera vez, not a conscious one. Just something I do of pushing my desk chair to a very specific angle when I leave for the day. Slightly to the left, angled toward the window. It's just the position I always return the chair to when I'm done. Like a bookmark for my body. On the 8th day, I came back from a grocery run. Maybe an hour, 90 minutes at most, and the chair was straight, centered in front of the desk. Not angled, not the way I left it. I stood in the doorway and looked at it for a few seconds. Then I thought, you probably moved it yourself and forgot. Do. Do. You're distracted when you leave. You were thinking about the brief you needed to finish. You nudged it and didn't register it. I sat down. I worked. I didn't bring it up to anyone. The second thing I noticed was the smell. Not a bad smell, just different. My room had a neutral smell, old wood, a faint trace of the cleaning product they'd used on the floors, the particular silence of a space where the windows don't open all the way. On the 11th day, when I walked in after dinner with Dana in the kitchen, there was something else, something clean but unfamiliar. Like a soap or a fabric softener I didn't own. I checked the sheets. I checked the towel hanging on the back of the door. I walked around the room pressing my nose to things like some kind of anxious animal. Nothing. Nothing. The smell was just there, in the air. Then it wasn't. I told myself the ventilation in old houses does strange things. I told myself Dana probably tried a new detergent and it drifted through the walls. I told myself a dozen sensible, quiet things that let me go to sleep without lying awake. And I went to sleep. That is the part I find hardest to forgive about my past self. Not that I didn't know, that I kept choosing not to. The recording showed up on my laptop on day 14. I need to be precise about this because I've turned it over in my head so many times that the details feel like they might slip if I am not careful. I was opening a new folder to organize research files for a piece I was scripting. The folder system I use is pretty rigid: date, project code, draft, number. I've done it the same way for 2 years. So when I saw a file in my documents folder that didn't fit the system, I noticed it immediately. It was an audio file. Unnamed. Just a string of numbers. A timestamp format I didn't use. The file had been created 3 days earlier at 2:17 in the afternoon. I had been out from roughly 1 to 4 that day. I remember because I'd gone to a coffee shop to work and lost track of time. I stared at the file name for a long moment. Then I told myself, software does weird things. Background processes, autosaves. From applications you forgot you had opened. The timestamp probably means nothing. It was probably created by the operating system doing something I don't understand. I almost didn't open it. I want to be very clear about that. I almost didn't open it. And if I hadn't, I think the story I'm telling you now would have a different shape. Maybe a worse one. Maybe better. I genuinely don't know. But I opened it. It was 43 seconds of audio. Ambient sound at first. A low hum I recognized as my laptop fan. The faint creak of the building settling. The distant sound of a car outside. The sounds of my room. Then, at around the 15-second mark, something shifted. A breath. Close to the microphone. Not my breath. I was at a coffee shop. Then a sound. Soft, deliberate, like someone moving carefully across wooden floors. Then silence. Then the recording ended. I listened to it 4 times. My hands were completely steady, and I was more frightened than I had ever been in my life. I spent 3 hours convincing myself there was a rational explanation. I'm telling you this, not because I'm proud of it, but because I think it's important, because I think it's what most people do. We are trained from childhood to doubt our own perception before we doubt the world around us. We call it critical thinking. We call it not overreacting. We call it being reasonable. What it actually is, a lot of the time, is fear wearing the costume of logic. Primera told myself. A recording app had glitched and captured ambient sound through the microphone while the laptop was sitting idle. I told myself. The breath and the footsteps were audio artifacts. Compression, distortion, the kind of thing that happens when files are processed by background software. Primera told myself the timestamp was corrupted. I told myself a long, elaborate story about technology behaving erratically in old buildings with inconsistent electrical currents. I deleted the file. That night, I lay in bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about the chair. I thought about the smell. I thought about 43 seconds of someone in my room. In the morning, I sent a casual text to Marcus, asking whether anyone else had a key to my room. I kept it light. Maintenance question, I said, just wondering about protocol. He replied within 10 minutes. Very warm, very reassuring. He said only he had a master key, used strictly for emergencies and advance notice repairs, and that I could absolutely request a lock change if I'd feel more comfortable. He added a smiley face. He asked how the scripting job was going. I said, "Thanks, all good. Who's checking? No need for a change." He said, "Door is always open if you need anything." Then he sent a second message. Not literally open, obviously, that would defeat the purpose. Ha! I laughed at my phone in an empty room. I kept the original lock. I started paying attention differently after that. Not in a paranoid way, or at least not in a way I recognized as paranoia at the time. More like I turned up a dial that had been set too low. I started noticing the small inventory of my own space. Where I left things, how things sat. The charger, I always coiled the same way on the left side of the desk. The notebook I kept at a specific angle. The single framed photo I had on the windowsill, my sister at the beach, laughing at something off camera. These were fixed points. I knew them. I started checking them. For 5 days, nothing. Then, on day 21, I noticed the photo. It was facing a different direction, just slightly. Maybe 20 degrees. My sister's laughing face pointed more toward the desk than toward the window. Primera picked it up. Primera looked at Italiano. I set it back the way I kept it. Then I sat very still at my desk for a long time and did not open my laptop. That evening I went and knocked on Dana's door. She answered in scrubs, just back from a long shift, looking pleasantly exhausted, warm brown skin, natural hair pinned up, reading glasses pushed on top of her head. She offered me tea before I said a word. We talked in the kitchen for about 40 minutes. I steered the conversation carefully. I asked about the house, about Marcus, about how long she'd been there. She'd been there 8 months. She liked it fine. Marcus was good about repairs, she said. Quick response time. Professional, I asked, as casually as I could manage, whether she'd ever felt like someone had been in her room. She looked at me. What do you mean? Like things moved, or like someone had been in there? She was quiet for a moment, then she said, once, maybe. Early on, I thought a book had moved, but I wasn't sure. You know how it is. You live alone long enough, you start questioning yourself. She laughed, a little tiredly. I laughed too. Neither of us said anything else about it. Iset atrap. I know that sounds dramatic. It was actually very small. I took a piece of clear tape and applied it horizontally across the bottom of my door and the door frame low enough to be invisible to someone entering, normally positioned, so that opening the door would break it unless you were looking for it. I left. I went to the coffee shop. I worked for 2.5 hours. I came back. The tape was broken. I stood in the hallway outside my door and felt the floor tilt slightly under me. I pushed the door open. The room looked exactly as I'd left it. Everything in its place. Chair at the right angle. Notebook at the right angle. Photo facing the window. Nothing was out of order, but someone had opened that door. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to breathe evenly. I thought about calling someone. My sister, a friend from my old city. I ran through conversations in my head, and they all ended the same way, with me trying to explain a piece of broken tape and a chair that was sometimes in a different position, and a 43-second audio file I had already deleted. There was nothing solid to hand to anyone. There was only my certainty, and my certainty, as I was beginning to understand, was the one thing I had no way to verify. That night, I emailed my editor. I told him I was having some issues with my current living situation and might need a few extra days on the next brief. He wrote back in 12 minutes. No problem. Take what you need. The content calendar has some flexibility this month, he also said, and I didn't think about this until later. He said, "You've been doing incredible work lately. By the way, the detail in your scripts has been really something, like you're pulling from somewhere personal." I stared at that line. I hadn't told him anything personal. I hadn't been writing from personal experience, had I? I started going back through my recent scripts. 3 pieces in the past month, all true crime adjacent, all following the standard structure my editor wanted. The ordinary life, the slow wrongness, the moment everything shifts. I'd written them in this room, at this desk, with those recordings playing. I read them like I was reading someone else's work, trying to find what my editor had noticed. And I found it in the second piece, a story about a woman who realized her neighbor had been accessing her property. There was a paragraph ID written about the specific feeling of knowing something is wrong before you can prove it, about how the body understands a threat before the mind will admit it. Reading it now, after finding the tape and the audio file, it felt like I'd been writing about myself, like I'd been writing it for months before I had the context to understand it. That was the first moment I felt something colder and stranger than fear. I bought a small camera. Not an elaborate setup. One of those compact travel cameras with a wide lens. I positioned it on the bookshelf across from the door, angled to capture the entry and most of the room. I ran it on a 12-hour loop and saved the files to an external drive I kept in my bag. Primera told no one. On the second day of recording, I found something. It wasn't dramatic. No figure standing in the doorway, no slow movement through the frame. Just this, at 1:52 in the afternoon. The door opened approximately 6 inches, stayed open for 4 seconds. Closed. No one came in. No one was visible. But the door opened. I watched the clip probably 20 times. The light in the hallway was dim late afternoon, overcast outside, so the gap showed only shadow. But the door opened. It moved with intention. Not a draft. Not a mechanical failure. It opened the way a door opens when someone pushes it and then changes their mind or checks. I think about that word a lot. Checks. The idea that someone was checking, not entering, not taking anything. Just looking, seeing if I was there. I put the clip on the external drive and I hid the drive in the lining of my laptop bag behind a false pocket ID made with tape and a strip of cardboard. It's the kind of thing you learn making scripts about people who should have hidden things better. Then I went to the kitchen and made coffee and stood at the window and watched a woman walk a small black dog down the street below, and she looked up at some point and saw me in the window and gave a small, uncertain wave, and I waved back, and she kept walking. I envied her. I envied everyone who could walk away from where they were. Marcus knocked on my door that evening. Not a text, not a message on the platform. A knock. He'd let himself into the house. He had a key for the building itself, obviously. And he was standing in the hallway outside my room looking completely relaxed. He was wearing a dark green jacket, jeans, clean sneakers. Easy smile. He said he'd been in the neighborhood and thought he'd drop by to check on the boiler situation. Apparently Theo had mentioned some pressure inconsistency. I stepped into the doorway. I did not invite him in. We stood there talking for maybe 10 minutes. He was completely warm, completely natural. He asked how the job was going. Primera, ça y define. He asked if the desk was working for me, whether I needed better lighting. I said no. The lighting was fine. He nodded, looked past me into the room for just a moment, then back at me. You look tired, he said, not unkindly observational. Long project, I said. You should get outside more. He smiled. Fresh air is supposed to help with the creative block thing, especially with the kind of work you do, all those heavy stories. I hadn't told him the stories were heavy. I'd told him I wrote scripts. That was all. I kept my face neutral. Yeah, I said. You're probably right, he said. Good luck. He went to check on the board. I heard him say something brief to Theo in the hallway. Then the front door of the house opened and closed. I stood with my back against my door for a long time after that. All those heavy stories. He knew what kind of stories I wrote, which meant he'd looked. I went through my online presence that night. Everything I could find about myself from a search. My name. My scripting profile on a freelance platform. It listed my specialization as narrative non-fiction, true crime, documentary style content. Public. Anyone could see it. Okay. He could have found that, but I also found something I had even remembered was visible. A comment ID left on a forum thread 8 months ago under a username I thought was anonymous. It was a thread about the ethics of true crime content. I'd written a long comment, thoughtful, A little conflicted. It had my real first name in the username. The comment had 11 replies. One of them was from an account with no post history and no profile picture. Posted 6 months ago. Its site, simply interesting perspective. Do you work in the field? I had never replied to it. The account name was a string of letters and numbers, completely anonymous. I took a screenshot, then I opened my scripting research from the past month and went through every piece of background research I'd done. Public records, forum, archives. I was looking for something I had unlooked for before, any thread where I'd been searchable. Primera, found, for, in each one, that same accountor, one structured identically, had either viewed the thread or left a brief, neutral comment near something I'd posted, not always interacting with me, sometimes just present in the same space, watching. I thought about leaving. I want to be honest about that. The thought came fully formed and practical. Pack the 2 suitcases, call a car, find a short-term sublet or a hotel, send a message to the platform saying there'd been a personal emergency. It was possible. It was the clean move. But then I thought about what I would actually have to say to anyone who asked. Chair, a smell. A broken piece of tape. A door that opened 6 inches on camera with no one visible. A comment on a forum, an audio file I had deleted. I thought about how it would sound. I thought about how many of the stories I'd scripted started exactly this way, with someone who felt something was wrong, who couldn't prove it, who waited too long, who told themselves they were overreacting, and I realized I was doing the same thing. Not because the evidence wasn't there, but because the evidence was ambiguous enough that I could choose not to act on it, because every single thing had a reasonable explanation if you were willing to work for it. That's the mechanism, isn't it? The slow accumulation of doubt until you're not sure anymore whether the threat is real or whether you've just scared yourself into seeing patterns, until you can't trust the most fundamental thing you have, which is your own perception of your own life. I had scripted that mechanism into a dozen stories. I had named it for strangers. I packed one bag. I put the external drive in my jacket pocket, and instead of leaving, I went and knocked on Dana's door. She opened it in pajamas. Late, almost 11, she looked concerned as soon as she saw my face. I asked if I could come in. She stepped back and let me. I sat in the chair by her desk, and she sat on the edge of her bed, and I told her everything. The chair, the tape, the audio file, the camera footage, the forum, comments, the thing Marcus had said about heavy stories, all of it, in order, without making it dramatic, just facts. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The book? What? The book I told you about? That I thought had moved. It happened 3 times. I told myself I was confused. I have a bad memory sometimes. I take melatonin. Sometimes I'm not sure what I did before bed. Se. Pauser. It happened after Marcus came to fix the window in my room. I remember that. Nah. We sat with that for a moment. He has a key, I said. He has a key, she said. She pulled out her phone. She went to Marcus's profile on the rental platform. She scrolled down to his reviews. There were 9 of them, all 5 stars. all warm. We read every one. Then she searched his name plus the city. A result came up. Not news, not a record. A Reddit thread, 2 years old, in a local community forum. Someone asking if anyone had rented from a landlord named Marcus, first name only, at an address 2 streets over from where we were. The original poster said they'd had a strange feeling that someone had been in their room. They'd left after a month. Nobody had replied with information. The thread had 4 upvotes and had been largely ignored. I looked at Dana. Dana looked at me. "We're not crazy," she said. It was the first time in 3 weeks I had felt the ground under my feet. We contacted the rental platform that night. We compiled everything. The camera footage, the screenshots, the forum thread, Dana's account of the book, the audio file description. I wrote it up the way I'd write a script. Clear. Sequential. The kind of documented account that doesn't leave room for easy dismissal. We sent it at 1:14 in the morning. We also sent a copy to local non-emergency police as a formal documentation request, not a dramatic report. Justa record. Just so it existed somewhere outside our own accounts. Marcus texted me the next morning. Very normal, very warm, asking if the hot water pressure had been okay because he'd noticed some fluctuation in the system. I said, "Fine, thanks for checking." He said, "Great, let me know if anything comes up." I checked the tape on my door. It was intact. 3 days later, the platform reached out. They said they were reviewing the account. They said they couldn't share specifics of the review process, but that they took concerns like this seriously. They said they would be in touch. I moved out 9 days after that. Found a room through a private listing. A woman subletting her second bedroom while she traveled for work. I paid cash in advance. I verified her identity 3 different ways before I signed anything. The last time I went through my old room, I checked every surface, every corner, every outlet plate in the smoke detector on the ceiling. A smoke detector that the rental listing had mentioned as a safety feature, professionally installed. There was a small lens, not large, not obvious, unless you were looking and knew what you were looking at. I know what I'm looking at. I still write scripts. I'm good at it. Maybe better now. My editor says my work has a quality hika and quite articulates something that makes the horror feel immediately close, like it's already in the room with the listener. He says, viewers comment on it all the time. How real it feels. How personal. I don't tell him why. I think about Marcus sometimes, about whether the platform did anything, about whether there's someone in that room right now, adjusting to its patterns, trusting its stillness. I've thought about going back and checking. I've thought about a lot of things. What I actually think about most is this. For 3 weeks, someone watched me reconstruct other people's nightmares, listened to me narrate violation, pattern, the slow erosion of safety, watched me call the details clearly in someone else's story, while I completely missed them in my own. I'm not sure what he wanted. I've tried to build the narrative the way I build all narratives, looking for the logic of motivation, the reason beneath the behavior. I don't have a clean answer. Some people surveil because they want to own something. Some because watching someone unsuspecting fills something that's empty in them. Some because they want to see if you'll notice, if you're paying attention, if you're as smart as you seem to think you are. Maybe he wanted all of it. Maybe he wanted me to find it. Eventually. Maybe that was the whole point, to see if someone who tells these stories for a living could recognize one when she was living inside it. The thing that keeps me up at night isn't whether he's still watching somehow. It's something quieter and harder to name. It's this. I still don't know, with complete certainty, whether I moved that chair myself and forgot, whether the audio file was actually a glitch, whether the book Dana remembered could have shifted on its own. I have the footage. I have the lens from the smoke detector sitting in a small bag in my laptop case. I have the documented record, but the part of me that spent 3 weeks choosing every reasonable explanation over the true one, that part doesn't fully quiet down. That part still occasionally wonders if I'm a reliable narrator of my own life. And I think that might be the most effective thing he ever did. More effective than the camera, more effective than the entries. He made me uncertain of myself, and some nights, that uncertainty is the last thing in the room with me when the lights go out.